when life is done, the mystery revealed will simply be that we are one. I've seen the world, I've seen the way the people walk, in different places how they talk. The similarities are stark, there's no escape.
Welcome to our program, Finding Community. We're going to tell the stories of some folks who have found a safe place to worship at Community United Church of Christ in Fresno. We don't preach at you, and we honor questions about your faith and about God, because no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are always welcome in our sacred space. Some of us are questioning our faith. Some of us are deeply rooted in our faith journey, and others still question. But we all come together on Sundays for the life-giving music and the thought-provoking sermons. My name is Amy, and I became a member in 2015. But my grandparents were founding members of this church, and so my connection and relationship with this church runs very deep. This is a congregational Christian church, and I was raised with those values. And in 2015, with the passing of my grandfather, Community provided a safe place for me to mourn and grow through that experience. We are an inclusive and progressive church, and by our hope in doing this program is that you see some stories and it causes you to think that maybe this is a place that you'd like to check out. So now our story begins.
Hi, I'm Julia Penner-Zook. I want to tell you a story today about a girl who grew up on the Canadian prairies where the wheat and the sunflowers wave in the summer breeze, and then of course you've got the winter snowdrifts as well. Life had its routines, it had its rituals. Running in the fields, over the fields, barefoot with her dog, Sunday church, practicing hours of piano, and later accompanying choirs and ensembles. But there was a lot of freedom there. At age 9, she drove a vintage Beetle, Volkswagen Beetle, around her parents' farm. And she learned to love that thrill of the downshift and pressing the accelerator on the car and just hearing that engine respond. That never left her. And so when she got to Germany years later, she loved driving the Autobahn at 100 miles an hour, just because she could. This girl also developed a love for God, and she had a lot of dreams. One day she enrolled in seminary, even though the church she was a part of at that point did not ordain women into the pastoral ministry. That led her on a 35-year quest, a journey that spanned continents in search of how she could use her gifts. Her belief in God did not change, but her understanding of what God is like changed over the years. And that led her to Fresno, California, and I assume that you already have guessed that I am that girl, and today that woman. I'm the pastor of Community United Church of Christ in Fresno. And I'd like to introduce you to Rod, my husband, also a child of the plains. Even though we grew up in different countries, there are some parallels in our experiences. Why don't you tell us a bit about that, Rod?
Right. I grew up on the North Dakota prairies. Same wheat, same snowstorms in the winter. Also in a conservative agricultural community. In fact, all 4 of my grandparents were Amish Mennonites. That tells you how conservative they were, and that's a part of my story as well. But there was a strong spiritual foundation there that nourished my life in those early years, and I still feel a part of that today as a rooting, as a foundation for my life.
Rod and I met at a Bible college in Canada. It wasn't, for either of us, it really wasn't a matter of that we were following any call at that point. We had different reasons for being there. At that point, I left for Germany, and I taught in an international K through 12 school. I taught piano. I ironically taught German as well, because these kids were not from German backgrounds. And then Rod went off to college in Indiana.
We kept in contact with letters during the time Julia was in Germany.
That's how long ago it was, no email. We married in my hometown, and then not that long afterwards, after college graduation and so on, we accepted a call to pastor a church in Quebec, in the French-speaking part of Canada.
We were there for 5 years and enjoyed that very much, but we knew we would never be Quebecers. And so it came time to leave after 5 years, yeah. And that's when we came to Fresno for the first time, to attend the seminary here at Fresno Pacific University.
I really didn't have any intention of studying when we got here. And in that first year we were here, I just felt that pull to studies and that intellectual challenge and that spiritual input. So after the first year, I enrolled in a program and just enjoyed the broad exposure to various theologians, and I loved the classroom discussion, talking with peers and with professors, and quite quickly people encouraged me to think about a call to ministry and to consider that as a possibility.
Yeah, so we were in seminary for 5 years, and in the course of that time, pastoral ministry for me was certainly an option. And then we came up against the question of ordination, but the denomination was not ready to ordain Julia and made that clear.
It was a few weeks before graduation, and Rod and I were invited to a conversation, an interview with a prominent church leader, and we weren't aware what it would be about, but during that interview it became very clear that this leader was saying, "We will not ordain you, but we really don't want to lose Rod over this." I was reeling at that point, so that was a painful time for me. And in retrospect, I realized it basically put that piece away for me. I never made the conscious decision, okay, well, I will never be ordained, I will never pursue this again. But essentially that's what happened as I look back on it now.
We had a fork in the road, and decided in the end then to take a call to serve in a church planting situation in Munich, Germany, where ordination wasn't necessary and wasn't on the agenda for anyone. So that was our solution, to get to work with that reality.
We spent 10 years with this church in Munich. Very good years. We learned a lot, grew a lot. We were challenged and stretched.
And shared the responsibilities and grew and changed and saw the world in a different way together. Mm-hmm. The changes began to be pretty visceral, pretty deep. Open-minded might be one way to put it, but just another way of thinking and seeing it.
It's interesting that on the surface, the German culture is very structured. But when I compare it to the land of the free, their thinking is a lot more open in a lot of ways.
One of the ways where the cultural differences come into mind, and where I was shocked initially, but pleasantly surprised in retrospect. At a church conference on a Friday evening, one of the most conservative pastors said, "Okay, I'm going here and there to get a beer. Why don't you all come with me?" Oh, that was a shock from my conservative American Christian upbringing. And and of course Munich is the center of, some would say the center of the beer culture in Germany. And I learned to be able to enjoy a good Augustiner beer from Munich. In fact, the last 10 years, we lived 200 yards away from Oktoberfest. So it was all around us all the time.
It's interesting, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, but in the first years we were there, we'd get gifts when people would come visit. That's just typical. We got a lot of bottles of wine, and they went down the drain. So that's embarrassing, and thank goodness it changed, because we really learned to appreciate that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, driving on the Autobahn is an experience like you don't have here, because except for construction zones or when you're near a city, there are no speed limits. You can drive what you feel your car will handle. So that was very freeing for me, because I tend to have a pretty heavy foot, and there was no fear of actually being stopped and getting a speeding ticket. I never got one there. That's more than I can say for here. It was a challenge then to come back. In between, we would come back to North America. We would do a lot of road trips as a family. And then to say, oh my goodness, I have to drive 75 or I have to drive 65 and make sure it wasn't any over that speed limit, that was a challenge. I began to look for some other work. I did some contract work at that time, some translating, some editing, and I ultimately then went into social services, into the educational part of that field. I found I really enjoyed it. It was a good fit for me. I got to know so many people and heard so many stories during those years that I actually published a book entitled Behind Each Face. It's 25 flash fiction stories based on, very loosely, some of the stories that I heard during those years. It transitioned more into writing poetry, which I still do to some degree today. I really enjoy that. It's something I really cherish. During those years that I worked in social services and spoke at various conferences, I was involved in a large church in Florida. I had moved to Florida prior to that. And for years I was involved to an extent. And there came a time in which I couldn't really support the theology anymore. I couldn't support what I saw in practice, and I felt I just needed to make a break with that. So I left that church, I withdrew my membership, and as a matter of fact, I did not participate in a formal church setting for quite a number of years. During that time, I read a lot. I got to know a lot of new authors. I read theology, I read novels, I read poetry, I read research, and many of those authors have stayed with me to this day. They've made a real impact on my life. A theological writer for me that has been important is Father Richard Rohr. A poet that's been important for me is Maya Angelou.
And we maintained those two households, so to speak, for quite a number of years. But came a point when it was clear that we would not live the rest of our life in Germany, nor in that divided household, that two household situation. And so we decided to come back to Fresno. Both of our children were in California at the time, and it just seemed like a good place to restart for what Richard Rohr calls the second half of life. And that second half of life aspect has certainly been a part of how we experience life now and experience church and theology as a much more embracing and open and welcoming kind of experience than maybe what we had grown up with.
When we came to Community United Church of Christ, we were just thankful to have a place. I recall the first months we sat really close to the back, and we would have been fine if no one had spoken with us, but they did speak with us because they're just warm and welcoming people. Not only the parishioners, but also the pastoral staff, very warm, very welcoming, just accepted us where we were. We didn't really want to be involved at that point and weren't sure whether we ever would be. And that was fine. We weren't pressured into anything.
One of the things that struck me in this congregation is the mission statements that are hanging in the sanctuary. And they grabbed me in terms of what this church aims to be. Forgiving others, loving God, embracing diversity, enjoying life, forgiving often, fighting for the powerless. Those are some of the words, some of the phrases that this church lives by on paper, but I've also seen and experienced it in the lives of people, either because of what they say and do, or simply because of who they are when we sit together in worship. That's what progressive means for me, and living it out, and it has been a breath of fresh air. Not to mention EJ's and the band's music, which I love. It's inclusive language, it's we and us and ours, and God and grace and hope.
About a year later, the pastor who was here when we first came, and we had learned to love and appreciate him, but he took a call at another church. So the church leadership then was needing to find a solution, sort of to bridge the gap before an interim would be called. It's at that time that one of the ministers asked whether I would be interested in participating in a preaching rotation. And I said, yeah, I think I would do that. So being part of that preaching rotation then also led to doing some pastoral care while the minister that was still at the congregation went on sabbatical. It wasn't very long into that when people asked me, are you ordained? Are you open to being ordained? Would you be open to a call to this church? And it all came quite suddenly, and my initial reply was no. But the questions kept resurfacing. So Rod and I talked a lot about that. We prayed a lot. I remember speaking with people who've known me over the years, and just to get my bearings and whether I should even consider this. I continued speaking with people in this congregation. And because my theology is one that believes that the Spirit nudges individuals, but the Holy Spirit also calls from the body of believers, I really began taking this call seriously. And I came to a point of saying, yes, I will start that road to ordination. And when the call then came, would you be open to pastoring this church? I was ready to embrace that call and joyfully accept it. And that's brought us here to Community United Church of Christ in a capacity that neither of us could ever have anticipated. I, as now the pastor of Community United Church of Christ, want to invite you to join us. Visit. Just like we didn't find an obligation when we first came to visit, we just came. You'll find us as a warm, embracing, eclectic, multi-generational, hope-filled church. We welcome you here.
Julia has been such a blessing to our church. She's been so supportive to me and my family through all the hardships of this year, and I really appreciate her from the bottom of my heart. And I'm just so grateful to have a pastor who's just so interpersonal with what she has to say and lift me up in prayer, and I couldn't ask for a better pastor.
And I've been a member of Community UCC for about a year and a half. When I first met Julia, before she was our pastor, I remember thinking how warm, kind, and genuine she was. I was thrilled when she became our pastor. Although services have been virtual for a while, Julia has led us to feel connected with each other. Her sermons have been very meaningful to me, especially in these trying times. She is able to eloquently connect the reading from the Bible to current times in our lives. I leave feeling calm, energized, and full of hope. Julia has also reached out to me during the week just to see how I'm doing. I feel as if she genuinely cares. We are very blessed to have her at the helm of our church.
You are welcome into this place. You are welcome into this place. You are welcome into this house of God. You are welcome into this place. You are welcome into this place. You are welcome into this house of God. You are welcome into this place. You are welcome. Light the way, clear the path to your kingdom on earth at last. Guide our steps, form our minds, light the way. Blaze the trail, cut the stone, help us take up your cause as our own. Shape our hearts, form our minds, light the way. Light the way. Let all those rejoice who trust in you. Let praises be ever on their lips. Let gladness be always in our hearts. Let justice and peace be daily done. Light the way, clear the path to your kingdom on earth at last. Guide our steps, form our minds, light the way. Blaze the trail, cut the stone, help. Where do we find the source of light or the well of mercy? Who installed stars into the night? Every small thing upon the earth is the fruit of your love. I am a soul of your design. We need your grace. We need your grace. We raise our hands to you, oh God. We need your grace. Where do we find the strength to rise standing up for mercy, doing the work of holy justice. How do we walk with you beside, humbled in your presence? Why do I feel this way inside? We need your grace. We need your grace. We raise our hands to you, oh God. We need your grace. God, I miss chances every day to do what's right. Sometimes I even look away. Give me your spirit so that I can do what's right in a dark world. We need your grace. We need your grace. We raise our hands to you, oh God. We need your grace.